Welcome to Belief, Being, and Beyond with your host, Granddaughter Crow.
I'll warn you that I have two dogs, and if something exciting happens out the window, they may bark. So we may be disturbed.
Welcome.
Yeah.
That is welcome here. That
Well,
is
and
welcome.
also kind of appropriate given the subject matter of my book. So,
Absolutely appropriate. So if they want to come on and sing a little song, that's absolutely fine. I love it. I love it. Hi, everybody. Granddaughter Crow here with another episode of Belief, Being, and Beyond. And this time we're headed up north to our neighbors in Canada, Winnipeg, Canada. I have Dodie Graham McKay here with us today. Say hi to everybody.
hi, everybody. Greetings from Canada.
Oh, I love it. Greetings from the US. Dodie Graham McKay is a writer, a green witch, a gardenerian priestess, and filmmaker, and of course, author. We'll be talking about that today. So she is inspired to document and share stories that captivate the beauty of nature and the visible and invisible realms of magic and witchcraft. Her films are a lot of them. They're on her website. One that I was watching earlier is the Winnie Pagans. And I think that's inspired by Winnipeg, isn't it?
Yep. Pagans from Winnipeg are called Winnipegans. What can I
Oh,
say?
that's so cool. And there's some other ones that she has, Exploring the Sacred. It's amazing. You can find it on her website at dodiegrahammckay.com. She's also an author, and I love her books. She is the author of Earth Magic, which was released by Llewellyn Worldwide as an aspect of, I think it was like elementals of magic, and you wrote the earth magic one, and there's also like a water and an air and fire, and isn't
Yep.
that correct? Yeah.
Four women from four different parts of the world each wrote for one of the elements. So we've got Lilith Dorsey, who wrote Water Magic, and she's in New Orleans. Got Josephine Winter, who wrote Fire Magic, and she lives all the way down in Australia.
Wow.
And Estrella Taylor wrote Air Magic. She's in the Midwest of the United States, and I'm up here in the North in Canada writing about Earth Magic.
I absolutely love it. And stay tuned. We will have Lilith Dorsey on the podcast coming up soon with her new release as well. Earth Magic. And today we are really going to delve into a book that's coming out September 2024. A witch's ally. This is so amazing because it's building magical relationships with familiars and animals. And before we dive into the book, on Belief, Being, and Beyond, one thing that I love to have people who actually do their belief system and in their beingness, and to kind of help the audience expand. So when we say you're a green witch or a gardenerian priestess, could you tell us a little bit more, like what is gardenerian?
Well, the Gardnerian tradition is a Wiccan tradition. It's an initiatory-based Wiccan tradition based on the work of a chap called Gerald Gardner, who lived in Britain. And he died quite a long time ago, but his legacy lives on. And he worked with some incredibly influential priestesses, including Doreen Valiente, who is also, also now deceased, but was a prolific writer of Wicca. So I'm initiated into that tradition. And I like to think of Wicca as it's kind of like my team sport, right? It's like when I get together with my witches and we're going to do stuff, that's when I call on the influence of the coven to boost the magic that I'm involved in. But when it's just me, puddling around in the backyard or doing stuff here at home, I consider myself a green witch. I work really hands-on with natural elements, with the spirits of nature, with the plants and animals in my environment.
It's where we really have a connection. This is not my first rodeo with Dodie. I actually was able to write a blurb, a review of Earth Magic years ago when that came out. And I think that in an email, you kind of mentioned that you are going to be working on another book with animals and familiars, and here it is.
I
So
know. Crazy, huh? And it's so wild because the book isn't officially released yet. It's so wild that you have a galley copy and you're holding it up. I guess I'm gonna have to get used to that, but it's so crazy when you have something that's in your head for so long. And I'm sitting, this is my desk, this is where I write, and to see it starting to creep out into the world is really exciting. Look at that cover. Laura Tempest Zakroff did that cover. And
it's
I think
amazing.
her artwork is amazing, and I'm so lucky that that she was up for doing that.
Yeah.
And then the foreword for the book was written by another pagan writer that I adore, Keldon. He wrote the foreword, so it's like
Nice.
it's so exciting to see it getting into the world.
On each of the big chapters, there are puppy paw prints doot, 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 going across the page. And I just wanted to give a call out to your puppies because you even have a picture in the book and you talk about them. It's in your bio that you love your dogs. I love that as an identity. So tell us just a little bit about your puppies.
My big inspiration was my dog Oben, and he died in 2017. And but we were together for 16 years, and he was, I mean, I'm allergic to dogs, Granddaughter Crow. I'm allergic to dogs. And the day I met him was pretty seismic. I mean, he was just a 6-month-old puppy at a in a shelter, and I just wandered by because I was buying pet food in the adjacent shop, and there was this little dog, and the rest is history. I mean, through him, I learned really about slowing down and looking at the world from other perspectives. I
Oh,
mean, like, I'm a witch, right?
right,
So,
right.
by definition, I'm supposed to be really tapped into all the unseen worlds, but to really dig in and do that from another point of view. And I started to really try to understand how Oben saw the world and what his senses granted him and what his perspective might be like and what his needs were.
Yeah.
And it really got me outside my head and challenged me as a witch to
Yes.
rise to the challenge of seeing the world through a different set of eyes, through a different species eyes.
Right.
And I learned a lot from him. I mean, I would have been a witch anyway, but I'm a much better one because of him. And
Oh,
when he died, I was so in the depths of grief.
yeah.
I I did not think I could ever feel that destroyed.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of space in our culture for grieving for beloved animals that are in our lives.
Yeah.
People would say things like, "Oh, you can just adopt another dog. Oh, he was just a dog." But there is a pureness to the relationship we can have with the animals in our lives.
I
So,
love that.
so yeah, so about 6 months after he died, a friend of mine who works for the Humane Society here in Winnipeg texted me and said, "There's this little mama dog here. She's got 4 puppies that are up for adoption. You should come and adopt a puppy." And well, I was not, I didn't think I was ready, but I also really like little puppies, so I went to see them,
Yeah.
and they were really cute, but I was really more interested in the mama. So we adopted Lola, who was the mother of the 4 puppies, and brought her home. And then during the late part of the pandemic, I adopted a 10-week-old little Russell Terrier named Georgia. And so I have 2 dogs. So I still am allergic, but somehow the love transcends the allergies, I guess. But
Yeah.
yeah, they're awesome. And unlike Oben, neither of them are magically inclined. Uh, but I don't know, maybe when Georgia matures a little bit, I think she might have a little touch of it in her, but it hasn't manifest yet. But Who knows?
Who knows? And this is such a great lead in to your book, A Witch's Ally, that's going, even though it's going to drop in September of 2024, you can pre-order it online at this time. And I'll drop your website above and in the comments below so people can find you.
Thank
It's what's really beautiful is that I was kind of digging into your filmmaking and how you speak about, doing that. And then hearing your story about Oban and then going in and looking at the layout of your book. It is so true to form of how you document this relationship to help us to create a more powerful, productive relationship with animals. And I think that what you just said about seeing the world through an animal's eyes, through a dog eyes, I see the world through a crow and raven's perspective. And it's just like, bam, I get it. And this is such a great book. So when I say true to form, I'm talking about there's part one talking about the history and the folklore, and I want to dig a little bit into that. Then there's this reimagining this magical relationship. So you're not of this mind frame that's really spread around that says, oh, well, like you said, it's just a dog or it's just a cat or it's just a. I have shed more tears over my familiar passing than I did over any human
Yeah.
to this day. When you're talking about it, I'm kind of tearing up. I'm like, mine was a black cat named King, and I have a garden to him in my backyard, and just amazing, like soulmate kind of material. And then so then in the third part of the book, it's like really being able to work with animals, and you say body and spirit, and you have a lot of rituals and spells and very practical. That's what I really appreciate you about you, is that you are very grounded and practical in your magical workings. So I mean, that's kind of the layout with the puppy dog paws, which I absolutely find endearing. So tell us just a little bit about the history and the folklore of how witches or spiritual people worked with animals.
Well, I mean, any documents that you read from, perhaps the witch trials or that period or earlier, there's this idea that people accused of witchcraft consorted with spirits that would sometimes take the form of animals, right?
Right, right.
And, you know, it- time and time again, if you're reading these witch trial records, these people who were accused are, they have a toad or a dog or usually some kind of small animal like a mouse or a frog, or a domestic animal like a farm animal or a dog or a cat, that were inhabited by some kind of spirit, a familiar spirit. Uh, and so that sort of gave birth to this idea that witches have a familiar, and the familiar is an animal. When it's usually, when you read back, it was usually some kind of familiar spirit inhabiting that form, or maybe they could shapeshift into that form, right?
Yeah.
So, I love reading those stories and I find them very intriguing and very compelling and very inspiring. But that's not how we use those words today. Quite often, if you speak to somebody who's interested in magic, they talk about their familiar being their pet, the cat or the dog that or bird or whatever that they live with. Fair enough. And maybe some of those animals are inhabited by familiar spirits in that sort of classic sense from the past. But I think more often than not, we're talking about just a magical relationship with that we have with them, and that's why we call them the familiars.
I love
So
that.
in the book, for the sake of the book and for the message I'm trying to convey is that when I refer to a familiar spirit, I'm speaking of an animal in the spirit world. So an animal familiar would be a spirit animal that is somewhere in the ether that we work with on a magical level. When I talk about an animal companion, that's a physical animal like my Oban was, who works magic with you. And then we have pets. And I've got two pets right now. I've got two dogs that are adored and I love them and we do everything together, but they're not really magically inclined. They're not really showing that side of themselves. That doesn't make the relationship any less special, but it's just, it helps to have terms to define these different types of relationships we have.
I like that. I really do like that because in that I'm like, oh, well, my familiar is a raven. It's a crow, and I'm just like, that's the magic of how I identify with it. And, my king is still around me, and it's just really, really amazing. I like how you categorize also the companion part of it. So talk a little bit more about the companion part of it, because your book kind of digs into the how to build deeper relationships with those as well.
Well, this is where that looking at the world through the lens of the animal that is your companion. Um, Somehow for me it ended up being, this dog that I lived with for so long. And because he was so interesting and he seemed to show interest in things that, in my experience, are very characteristic of what dogs are interested in.
Right.
And that he would communicate things to me that seemed uncanny, that just I'd never had those experiences before. So I was really feeling my way through them. So to reciprocate that kind of special energy that he was giving to me, I would tune into him. I would spend a lot of time, stroking his head and massaging his ears and just really appreciating and massaging his body, which in the end actually proved to be one of the ways that I was able to take such good care of him, because I would be able to tell by touching him if he had a lump or if he was sore somewhere. I knew how he felt,
Yeah.
so I knew if something was wrong. So it was a type of communication that we developed. He was very frightened of thunderstorms, and I was always aware of when one was coming because of I would watch his behavior shift. And it was so subtle, but because I was looking for it, I could pick up on it. Which also made me realize that if he could hear things that I couldn't hear, if he could sense things that I couldn't sense, I needed to pay attention to him because he was constantly giving me cues and signals for things. And if I really wanted to have that, really sharp intuition or perception that, would be like magical for a witch to have, my companion animal was giving me everything I needed to know. He was constantly feeding me intelligence. So if I was attuned to the subtleties of that, I could read it and it could help me be a better witch.
I absolutely love that because I agree. One of my wonderful companions, Beyond King, was also a beautiful orange cat from the Navajo reservation, and fell in love immediately with this cat. And I called him Orion, and just beautiful. And what I would do when I was in the summertime in the backyard, I wouldn't call him verbally. I'd think really hard about him and then look at my environment, telling him, this is where I am. Where are you? This is where I am. Where are you? He was really, really good. Every single time I did that, he came from wherever he and was just like, hi. So a lot of times, like when I talk to my animals or companions, I don't, yes, I do speak English. I do let my cat know, I'll be right back, or, all of those things. But when I really want to connect, I do it personally through pictures and vibrations. I won't use English words or human words. I will like send them pictures or smells or something like that. Does that sound weird to you, or do you have any?
No, I mean, each of us have a different way of sensing the world, right? You do it through pictures, it sounds like. Um, I'm very tactile, the way things touch, the way surfaces are. That really, I can really call that up quite easily into my imagination. So that it doesn't surprise me, you know. Um, Knowing what types of senses an animal leads with is going to make you closer to that animal, right? Um,
Yes.
when I think about a snake and how
Yeah.
they're, sometimes we forget these are cold-blooded creatures that are seeking warmth, right?
Yes.
You know, emitting warmth is something about us that they like, you know. Um, you have an affinity with crows, understanding the feeding patterns, the breeding patterns, the flight patterns, the habits of a crow, and thinking in those terms.
Yes.
Probably I'm projecting here, but I would imagine that that really empowers you to work with them, right?
100%. 100%.
Yeah. So, when you would know, because if you're observing crows on a regular basis, you would know when a crow is doing something unusual. You would know when a crow is doing something that is out of their instinct or character to do. And
Yes.
you could read that as an omen of something
Yes.
good or bad that might be happening in your environment, depending on what it is, right?
Yes.
I was out walking in the woods near this cabin that my cousin and I like to rent. Years ago, I was walking in the woods near there, and overhead, I noticed quite a large number of crows. Maybe a dozen of them circling,
Oh,
just circling and
yeah.
circling. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, well, how do I read this? Part of my mission outside in the woods that day was I was hoping to come across some bones, right? So I was looking and kind of keeping an eye on the sky for birds that eat carrion to follow to where there might be some carrion laying around in the woods. And I did. I found it was a little bit too meaty for me. Somebody had obviously killed and skinned some beaver and dumped the carcasses in the by the side of the road. Um, but the birds told me it was there, and it's something I would have missed if I hadn't been paying attention to the natural cues that the birds were giving me.
So if you're enjoying the Belief Being and Beyond podcast and would like to support it, I'm on Patreon. Just go to Patreon, Granddaughter Crow, or you can find it at granddaughtercrow.com. Thank you so much. I love this. There's a part of me that's like, oh my goodness, you should write a book about it.
Yeah, been there, done that.
I love it. A witch's ally. You guys can pick this book up, but there is so much richness in, you also have like spells and recipes, and you lay out stones and herbs and all of these different ways that can help us even increase our relationship with how you identify the familiar being a spirit animal and the companion being an animal that you deeply have a soul connection with here on earth, if I got that correctly.
Yep.
And talk a little bit more about what people can find, because I think that this is going to interest a lot of people who already feel connected to their, companion and want to deepen that connection in more of an organic witchy way.
Well, there's a bunch of things in here. I mean, I for me, writing spells and rituals and things, that doesn't come easy. That I need to be able to do those things and work with them over a period of time so that I know that they feel good and that they work. So the things that are in the book are things that I've done. They're things I do. They're things I've tried. Um, I tried to include the different rites of passage that happen, when you adopt an animal, making a commitment to take the best possible care of that living thing that you've invited into your home. Um, there's some hard things to write about too. You know, I love animals, and I eat meat, and
Right.
sort of reconciling that, and how do you honor that those beings that are killed so that we can eat. A lot of witchcraft involves working with animal parts. We like having animal skulls on our and as decor. We have. I'm just looking around my desk. I've got a blue jay feather and some cat whiskers, and
Oh yeah.
things that are found parts of animals that who hasn't found a feather laying on the ground and picked it up. It's how do you and sometimes you need to handle those things carefully because something as innocent as a feather might have mites on it that could
Right.
cause problems.
Right.
So the proper treatment of those things, how to clean animal parts when you find them. You mentioned stones. There are some stones or crystals that we collect that might also have a nice effect for the animals in our lives. But they also come with a risk too. You don't want your budgie snacking back on that, those quartz beads or something. So you got to be careful and just some good tips and practical advice for how to do these kinds of things.
I love that.
Um, there's also a chapter towards the end of the book, which is about, when your animal companion or pet dies,
Yeah.
you that's rough. That is so hard. I heard you say you cried harder for King than you did for any person or anybody else. I know I cried harder for Oban than I did for anyone else in my life, you know,
Yeah.
human or animal. So there's a chapter dealing with that, how to how to deal with that, and a suggestion for a ritual that you can use. And unfortunately, that ritual was written in my time of crisis. I had to honor Oben's spirit in some way when he died, and we had a funeral for him, and
Wow.
it was the saddest funeral.
Yeah. It's interesting because as an author, a lot of times being able to touch the silhouette of our rawness is one of the almost birthing process that we and this feeling of I can't believe this sacred thing I'm actually going to put out to the world, and it's really difficult. Can you just speak just a minute on that, because I've had to do that too, and it's just like, but then after the book gets released and you get people coming in going, you didn't just write that out of fiction. I felt it. They feel the realness, the tangibility, the connectedness of what you're saying and that experience. So as an author, when you have to approach those difficult things and put it out into the world, what's your experience around that? Not to get too raw, but I've done it too.
Well, it is raw, and it makes you feel very vulnerable,
Yes.
when you know when when Oban died and I wrote a ceremony for him, you know a few years later I'm putting that ceremony in a book and I'm sharing it with whoever picks up the book. And that's really my heart in the world, right?
Yes.
And in earth magic there's a food blessing that I put in the book, and that's a food blessing that my coven has used for years. I mean, I wrote that 20 years ago for a feast that we were having, and it stuck. But I mean, if we're not sharing these
Yes.
sacred things, then they exist in a vacuum, and that's not healthy either. So it's worth being vulnerable. It's worth taking the risk and putting those things out there for people to read. um you run the risk of it not being for everyone, and somebody making fun of you or giving you a really bad review on Amazon because of it. um but it's a risk you got to take, right?
Yeah,
It's
I agree. I agree. Some of the most raw parts that I've written about, of course, we're encouraged by our, editors, and they're like, tell us more about that because it actually is written for the individual reader who does not know how to articulate or express their feelings, and they come from a place that nobody understands, that their companion is crossed on, and you become that light for that individual person one at a time. And so thank you so much for doing that, because I already know some of my listeners, and I know that they are going to pick this book up because of that.
Mhm.
Like, you're putting words around something that nobody else understands.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you.
Well, and it's hard. I mean, I in the process of writing this book, my editor lost a pet,
Oh,
and
wow.
she shot me a little note one day that said, proofreading that chapter really helped me right now. One of my pets just died. And I was like, wow, the book isn't even out yet. And if that's where it stops, if that's the only person who gains benefit, then it helped somebody, and that's good. Um, witchcraft is an intensely personal thing, and every book isn't for everybody, but it is for somebody, right?
Yes. Yes.
And that's important. It
Yeah.
I'm kind of the mind that there's no good or bad books. There's books that are for you and books that aren't for you,
Well
right?
said.
And if a book isn't for you, maybe it's for somebody else,
Yeah.
and if you love a book, give the author a 5-star review on Amazon, because it actually does help.
It absolutely helps. And, again, A Witch's Ally by Dodie Graham McKay. Pre-order your copy, people. There's so much, it's so rich, and I can't cover everything, but I am loving my copy of this. But more than even just this book, check out Earth Magic. And that's how we actually met, was on email when I wrote a review or a blurb for Earth Magic, and I absolutely fell in love with it because it's such an encyclopedia that you can have. It's like one of a four-part series, like you said, about, elemental magic, by Call Out Llewellyn Worldwide. Love you guys. And then check out, of course, Dodie Graham McKay's.com, where you find these wonderful films. And I'm just really enjoying it. And I can't wait till I get to watch some more of them. Like I said, I was watching Wiki Pagan or Winnie Pagan. And I was all Wikipedia in that one, Winnie Pagan. And I started falling in love with these people's stories around what brought them to paganism and the different paths, and identifying with the different perspectives that have people come in. But it's just, I mean, you did a really excellent job. I really was enjoying the cinematography of it all. And I'm just like, yay. So check that out. Of course, review, follow. I'll drop in Dodie's social media links. Is there anything else as we begin to wrap up that you want to highlight about this book? It's very rich. It shares a lot about, like I said, the history and the folklore. It shares a lot about how you can actually connect. It shares about this whole process. It kind of brings the whole thing, and this little thing that we all kind of keep in the back of our minds, like, oh, I'm a witch, I have a black cat, and actually brings it to life and
Mhm.
gives more tools around how to deepen that connection. So is there any other thing that I may have missed that is a message for the listeners, or for your book people that that are going to be reading this as it comes out in just a few months?
Um, I don't know. Whenever you have an animal that you live with, whether it's a regular visitor to your bird feeder or a domestic pet that lives in your house, say thank you to them. give them gratitude. On some level, everybody understands what it feels like to be appreciated. And when we give gratitude to the animals in our environment, it feels good for us. And I'm so positive that it feels good for them.
I 100% agree. Know that if you see a bird, it saw you first and it's allowing you to see it, so that it's not you observing the natural world, it's actually you being in it and going, wow, that hawk knew that it saw me before I saw it, and it allowed me to see it. So and have that energetic exchange, which you can deepen with your copy of A Witch's Ally. So Dodie, I know you have some upcoming events in 2024. Can you give us a little rundown of the places that you're going to appear at so people can actually meet you in person, or the events that are coming up?
Okay, well, coming up in July, I will be in Atlanta for the Mystic South Conference that I love. I love going down to Atlanta for Mystic South. It's amazing. Um, what else? I have in September, I will be in Minneapolis for Twin Cities Pagan Pride, which coincides with the release of the book. So, you know, Llewellyn headquarters is in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Twin Cities Pagan Pride is just an amazing event. So I'm really pumped about that. And then in October, because I can't stay away from the Twin Cities, I will be back in Minneapolis for the Samhain Symposium. And that concludes my travel for this year. Really looking ahead to what will be happening in 2025. I think it's going to be a great year. I'll be no doubt heading down to Paganicon in March of 2025, which is also in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. I love you.
Right? Call out to Minneapolis, St. Paul. A lot of magic happens, people. I'll drop some more information so that you guys, if one of those interests you and you're going to be in that area, drop by and meet Dodie. Very grounded, wonderful witch. And thank you so much for being on Belief, Being, and Beyond. I love this book. I love connecting with you.
Always a
And
pleasure.
yeah, and so thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's good to see you again. I keep imagining that someday we're going to meet up in person, and I think we're going to go crazy when we finally get our hands on each other.
No, I agree. We're gonna run out into the natural world and be like, whoa, look at that, look at this. I absolutely love it. So thank you. Thank you for being on the show. So thank you, listeners, for tuning in to another episode of Belief, Being, and Beyond with your host, Granddaughter Crow. Of course, like, subscribe, share, and review. As Dodie says, it really, really helps. It helps us to know what you liked so that we can bring more of that material to you, but it also helps the information to get out there, and it could take you like less than 5 minutes to do a review. And of course, share with those who you think would find this information interesting. Again, thank you so much, Dodie, and love you, listeners. We'll see you on the flippity flip.